And they said something I shall not forget. They said, you know, on the night that President Obama was elected, we went to our temples, our mosques, and our churches, and we prayed. And when the announcement was made, we shouted and we cried. And I said, my, that's something. That's so different from Rush Limbaugh. We have to hear with global ears and respond with a universal heart. That's just one paragraph. We'll take up the rest in the next meeting. Thank you.
We thank our panelists for their very thoughtful and provocative presentations. And as I listened to Dr. Moss conclude, I said, well, he's true to the Morehouse tradition. There was Dr. King. The theme of his mission was the beloved community. And then Dr. Howard Thurman, who came before Dr. King, had as the motivation for his message the search for common good. We're grateful to these panelists, and each one spoke from the particularity and the integrity and authenticity of his or her experience. We must respect that. And now we're going to have questions, and it has been my experience when I have been an observer of panels like this that some people would stand up from the floor under the disguise of wanting to ask a question and then preach their own philosophy. These panelists have too much to give us for us to do that. Let's ask for information or ask for clarity. You may address, you may stand where you are. I don't believe we have a microphone on the floor, but use your preaching voice and direct the question to the panelists of your choice. To my left, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Darrell A. Ballard II from American Baptist College. My question is for Brother Sekou, Minister Sekou. I'm not sure if I see Brad Braxton here, but
he's here.
Okay. I just don't think I don't think it was fair because he's not up here to comment on. But could you clarify your beef there?
No, it's not a beef with Braxton. Braxton know what I'm talking about. I got it. But I think also part of it is...
It's a legitimate question. It's a question for clarification.
Yeah. So what I'm making an argument, right, that one of the tensions that we saw play itself out so ugly on the national scene, particularly as it relates to Riverside, is that there's a historical tension now in liberal religion, which has historically been the supporter of liberation theologies and progressive movements in the country. And so that tension is subtextually racist, right, because it's this notion of topical preaching, right? So you kind of preach from a topic which is not about walking text. It's not exegetical. And so they're set up as a distinguishment, right? So you either walk text or you do topical preaching. The problem is that it ignores the rich African-American tradition of walking a text as a liberatory model, which Braxton does. Right, and so that's and the reason why that's significant, that it's not about his tension with Riverside, which I'm pissed off about, it's not about fact. It's about that we're in a moment in an American theological project where the biblical narrative has ultimately been subsumed by prosperity theology in the public discourse. And so you don't have, so so the reified notion and the hegemony of capitalist discourse has come to take over the biblical narrative in such a way that it has decentered the prophetic tradition. So the gospel is prosperity theology. You understand what I'm saying? And so and what happens is that then people who are liberal in their theological orientations reject all form of preaching of the gospel, which alienates the vast majority of African Americans because they can't engage in the text in a way that is sensitive and honors our tradition. So I don't want to blow that off. Yeah. I want us to be very clear about that, because part of the problem is that it gets reproduced in our. I'm a pastor, right? So I have to do, so I got to preach Sunday. So I have to wrestle with this all the time. It's what happens. It gets reproduced this way: 7 steps to a turnaround. Yeah. Right? It gets reproduced in the kind of pop theology, which is essentially laced with market discourse. Yeah. Right? Eddie Long ain't the problem. He's a symptom of a theology, and a victim of a theology, and an insidious down low culture, right? So that's part. And so until we're willing to wrestle theologically and make normative, right? When we just basically say, if I want a committee of Dr. Moss and Dr. Smith and all the elders to get together and say, if you ain't preaching liberation, you ain't preaching. And so that's my point. No. I'm always taking shots at Braxton.
Yes.
Yeah. No beef at all.
This is rich. It's dialogical.
Mm-hmm.
So, another question? Yes.
I'm also Dr. Miller, no relation. In terms of the youth, do you think that the way they use their bodies is an effective antidote for the anxiety that they feel? And what role does community play in helping them to, it could be their own communities or other convictional communities, play in helping them to cope?
I do think that the use of their bodies are effective, definitely effective. And it's a perpetual process. It's not something like they dance or they write rhymes and then they achieve this sort of liberation, right? It's a continual practice. It's something they do on a daily basis. It's something they have to come back to. I think where the community can come in is sort of a dethroning of a particular kind of politics of respectability that's endemic to black middle class culture, whether it's inside the church or in broader American society. They're using their bodies in different ways that kind of push up against the norms of respectability. So if we can't get past that norm of respectability, then we can't appreciate the plurality of how the body is used in youth culture today.
So more conventional communities to respect the tattoos and the piercing and maybe the way they dress and all that.
Right. So in part of the work that I'm doing in Philadelphia and also in Cuba is thinking about faith in the flesh, thinking about manufactured zones of significance with a central sort of focus on the materiality of the body. Right? So these things that are socially marked in society, piercings and tattoos, they actually have much significance for youth cultures and American culture. It's that we can't get past our own politics of respectability in order to embrace what these things actually mean and signify.
And I just want to add, and I was thinking about this in your talk, is that I think the deployment of the body that we see in hip-hop culture is also manifest in the rise of Pentecostalism throughout the world.
Okay.
I'm a Kojic boy,
right?
And so we deploy the body. There's a use of the body. There's essentially a sensual and erotic use of the body within the context of black Pentecostal worship. So I think it's taking place in the church, and I think what you've raised as the anxiety and the crisis discourse is an international discourse, and has an effect that while we see the rise of various forms of piercing, I mean, I got tattoos, you got tattoos, it's generational. You see the rise of that. You also see the rise in terms of black Pentecostalism responding to that same anxiety, right? So I mean, I frame it as that we live in a kind of zeitgeist der Angst, right? The spirit of the age is angst. Right. And so whether manufactured or not, folks tatting themselves, they're using hip hop, Santeria, Pocomo, Vandu, Yoruba is rising. And you see it also in Pentecostal churches. So I think they're one for one. And the notion of respectability, because black middle class, and I ain't talking about nobody in this room, but black middle class folks have a response to Pentecostal worship. It don't take all of that. Right? So it's the same respectability is at work. Right? It's at work. So I would want to lift up your argument and say that it has a religious response within the context of postmodernity.
I mean, I think we have to get beyond the moral critique in order to kind of appreciate these things. I mean, I'm talking about, you know, I'm working with gay youth and their clothing is different and they're voguing and it's very sexual and it's very sensual, and I don't think that has to be bad, right? So I think we have to kind of get beyond the moral critique in order to embrace kind of new ways of performing meaning in the world.
And then I would say, I don't have a tattoo, but it does take all of that.
Yes, I see a hand in the back. Could you stand, please, and give your name and address the people on the panel that you would like to confront the question?
Janetta Hatcher, I'm here from Detroit. Just a question, I'm not really even sure how to phrase it. We talk about embracing all, and I do totally believe in doing so. I guess the question that I see some of my brothers and sisters wrestle with is, what now is sin, you know, for the church? And then how do we integrate? For example, we say we believe as Christians that Jesus is the only way, if you will, and we talk about getting to heaven. And so most of our churches, a lot of our brothers and sisters spend a lot of time trying to get people into heaven. And we get them into heaven based on the notion of what we believe as the only way. And so, I'm getting to it because I do have to explain it, thank you. And so the question is, how do we now as a church, as Christians, redefine what we consider to be sin?
She didn't. Is it okay? If I can jump in, is that all right, Dr. Moss? I think, well, one is that, the biblical narrative is a contested text. That's why we got denominations, right? So the idea that there's one way is just fallacious, right? So I want to lay that out. Two, sin is socially constructed. It was socially constructed in the biblical narrative. Like it was a sin if you...
Could you unpack that? I understand what you talked.
Well, sin, what I mean by sin is socially constructed, that when we look inside the biblical narrative, what we see, for instance, that if you couldn't pay a sacrifice, right, you didn't have no money. That's what Jesus got mad about, them selling them sick doves, right? Because they was selling sick doves so you could pay your sacrifice, right? So it was socially constructed, right? We got some folks selling sick doves now. And so it was socially constructed. So I want to contest the category of sin, and I want to contest the category of the way, because I think there are multiple ways. The other is that for people who've been historically othered, i.e. black folk, that having something that belongs to them, that they hold on to deeply. Granddaddy used to tell me, boy, don't you sit in Sister Martha's chair, because outside Sister Martha ain't nobody, but in here she's Sister Martha. So I think that those categories and that existential development of black people inside the U.S. needing something to hold on to creates a kind of confined space whereby folks are not able to be open and honoring or whatever. I mean, and because the real question is that I hear subtextually is around gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons in our congregation. Okay, but then I'm projecting. I'll talk to my therapist about that. I want to argue that we're going to have to come to terms with it, because one of the other challenges in terms of the deployment of the body, and I said this yesterday in terms of sin, who's sinners or not, black choir directing is a queer aesthetic. I have no memory of not having gay black men in my life. I am a church boy, right? Ain't nobody molested me, done nothing to me, or nothing like that. It is the reality that in our churches we have always held the space for Twan. And Twan could direct our choir, snap his fingers, roll his neck, and we honored that. And the discourse of sin was subjugated to his capacity to take us to the highest levels of spirituality. And so I want to keep track of that and honor that and bear witness to that, because if we're not willing to have that real conversation about what sin is and what the way is, we're going to continue to